Thugs assault a retired K9 minutes later. His Navy SEAL handler made them regret it. The first scream wasn't human, it was the wind ricocheting off Blackthorn Ridge, bending the pines until they whispered Jace Ryder's name. He stood on the porch, ex-Navy SEAL with the quiet of a storm before it breaks, while Kane, 110 of scarred German Shepherd, smelled something the rain couldn't wash. Clang. Metal against a post. Not a cowgate. A metronome. Jace followed the sound to his fence line and found a precise row of orange flags, where none had stood at dusk. Drayton Holdings, Phase 3. Under a forebranch, a camouflaged box waited. Red wire tucked like a smile that didn't reach the eyes. No explosive fill. A rehearsed threat. Kane's torn ear tilted. His chest low rumbled a warning that remembered Ramadi. Headlights blinked twice on the ridge, and died. Someone was timing his heartbeat. Jace took photos, then paused. On the back of one stake, a black sigil bled through wet paper, a thorned ring he knew from maps that never officially existed. He looked at the house. The steel locker in the mudroom looked back. Rain thickened. Fog slid off the creek like breath. 3 engines cut the night dirt bikes without plates, rolling slow, not hiding, savoring. They circled the yard, let silence fall, then parked beneath the flags, as if planting a claim. The smallest rider tapped a Louisville Slugger against his boot. Tap. Tap. Everyone has a price, a voice called, too polished for the mud. Kane stepped between Jace and the men without a bark. The bat rose, hesitated, fell, impact thudded in the air. Jace caught Kane before the ground could. His phone rang once and connected. Ghost, he said. They touched him. Static, a breath. Copy. Locker time. What happened next isn't a fight. It's a ledger being balanced. Line for line with names none admit. Morning thinned the rain to a breath over Silver Ridge, and Jace Ryder drove into town with the practiced calm of a man who preferred clear lanes and open sight lines. Kane rode beside him, 110 pounds of trained shepherd, scarred and steady, his torn ear tilted toward every clink, scrape, and passing scent. The truck's heater hummed while the window stayed cracked, because fresh air carried messages dashboards never would. Jace turned onto Main, parked nose out under the awning of Miller's General, and stepped down into puddles that reflected the ridge like broken glass. Kane landed lightly despite the limp and matched his pace to Jace's knee. The bell over the door chimed. Heat and coffee smell wrapped the aisles. Leather, rope, seed, and lantern oil layered together the way this town layered gossip over silence. A corkboard offered a church supper, a used tractor, and a request for piano lessons. Mabel Miller worked the register with a pilot's focus and flicked a glance at the dog, granting him the tiny nod reserved for reliable customers. Jace pushed a cart. Kane flowed along the feed aisle like water in a narrow channel, never brushing end caps. At the back, heavy kibble bags sat stacked to shoulder height. He lifted 2 into the cart, set gauze and saline beside them, and added canine pain tablets, because comfort could be managed even when peace could not. He crouched to check pupil response and the scab on the torn ear, then rose as a draftless chill rolled through the store. Authority had entered. Sheriff Riley Kane stepped inside wearing a crisp uniform and quiet confidence. She glanced at the shepherd first, filed away details, and walked up the aisle as if the boards had drawn her there. She stopped without blocking anyone and spoke in a tone that did not need volume. You're the ghost up on Blackthorn Ridge. Not accusation, not praise, not a question. Jace allowed a small nod. Keeping to my place, he said. Her eyes paused on the gauze before returning to his face. Survey crews have wandered where they shouldn't, she said. Stake lines in the wrong draws. If you're seeing flags, strangers or devices, I want to hear before it gets loud. He weighed the urge to hand over photographs against the habit that said information is a currency best spent late. If needed, he said. The bell chimed again. Polished confidence came through the doorway on clean soles. Vance Drayton entered with 2 men orbiting him, one broad-shouldered and eager to be noticed, one thin with his phone already up, angling for a frame that would make a threat look like an invitation. Cashmere rolled neatly at the wrists, a smile designed for announcements. Cologne that did not belong in a room where rope outnumbered souvenirs. Vance assessed the aisles with a proprietary glance, and drifted toward Jace's cart as though pulled by a gravity he believed he made. He ignored the badge without admitting it. Mabel kept wringing nails for a rancher who paid increased bills and wore a hat shaped by weather. Riley turned slightly, making a clean lane for anyone wise enough to use. Jace stayed still, hands visible on the cart handle, chin level, attention soft but ready. Kane placed himself between Jace and the trio, stance square and balanced, head level, tail neutral, eyes analyzing angles. Vance rested his gaze on the kibble like it was a ledger he might close. "Everyone has a price, Mr. Ryder." The words were silk over wire. The camera phone edged closer to catch a flinch for later. Jace did not flinch. Kane stepped forward one measured pace. One growl, no bark. The sound drew a line across the eye. Vance's right foot paused. Recalibration flashed in his eyes, and the smile rebooted a half-beat late. He shifted a small step back, which he dressed as courtesy. "We're neighbors," he said lightly. "My family's putting in roads, bringing jobs, making this valley safer, firebreak, security patrols, the kind of improvements that raise values." Riley let the silence test the statement. "Back it up, Mr. Drayton. No flare, no heat, only steel." He obeyed by inches without naming it obedience, tilted his head toward the camera, and laughed as though the room had shared a joke. "Just talking, Sheriff." The broad shadow tried to fill the exit lane with posture and found the space resisting him. The thin one, reading the mood late, lowered the phone. Mabel slid a paper cup toward Vance. "Coffee's over there," she said. He produced $2 as if buying respect. The moment resumed being a store. Jace placed the kibble on the counter, added gauze and saline, and kept his shoulder angled to shield Kane's flank from surprise movement. The card reader chirped when he tapped. The receipt fed out. The world continued turning, as if fault lines were not being chalked beneath boots. Vance remained near the door like a man attempting to claim a threshold by occupying it. Riley shifted just enough to create a clear path, then spoke with the same measured authority. "Let the man go about his day." The broad shadow stepped aside because the floor told him to. Jace guided the cart forward. Kane flowed with him, gaze fixed on the frame, attention sharpened into patience. Outside, sunlight scattered on puddles and threw bright splinters across the hood of the truck. Jace loaded the feed, strapped it down and stowed the medical bundle behind the seat. He closed the tailgate, studied reflections in the glass without turning his head, and saw no survey rigs, no unmarked trucks, just two hikers, debating trail mileage under the diner awning, and a church sign promising a potluck if the weather behaved. He opened the door. Kane climbed in and settled with his chin on the window's rubber seal so he could keep the store's doorway framed. Inside, Vance spoke too fast with his hands while trying to look unhurried for the camera that was no longer filming. Riley left first, and idled her cruiser one block down by the feed store, presence masquerading as routine. Vance emerged next, smoothing a cuff, resetting his smile and finding Jace through the windshield. He lifted two fingers in a lazy salute that wanted to feel like victory. His broad companion muttered about the dog's eyes. The thin one texted with his head down, careless about curbs. Jace turned the key but did not pull away. He let the engine hum settle under his ribs, and focused on the rectangle of glass that governed the morning. The door acted like a line between theater and consequence, between names on signs and the claims behind them. He saw the reflection of the sheriff's car in the window, the edge of Vance's SUV, and the faint shape of his own truck layered over the street like thin ice. Kane did not blink. The shepherd held the picture as if waiting for a target to declare itself. Jace breathed in, tasted coffee and rain, and a trace of cologne, and decided on the only plan that had ever served him: watch, measure, be first when first was unavoidable. He put the truck in gear, checked the mirror, and waited for Riley to move because some rules still mattered, even when lines had been crossed. He rolled onto Main, only after her cruiser eased forward. The town slid past, a barber shop with jars of blue combs, the post office with a flag still damp from last night, the church board where hope had been lettered in red, that bled when wet. In the mirror, Vance and his men formed a triangle and gestured at routes, lots and some. The cologne faded with distance, but the message did not. The ridge lifted ahead, and the road bent toward home. Jace kept his hands light and his mind heavier than most miles required. He considered early calls and stored photographs, and the steel locker whose hinges still turned, then let those thoughts settle and returned to the habit that kept him breathing, readiness without noise. Kane's eyes never left the door. He remembered everything. If you've ever had a dog who'd die for you, hit that share button. This one's still fighting. Rain hammered Blackthorn Ridge until the hills blurred into a single slate wall. Jace Ryder had checked up wires, stacked sandbags, and laid a blanket by the stove for Kane, then killed the cabin lights and listened to the storm breathe. The shepherd lay near the door, with his torn ear cocked toward a thread of sound the rain could not swallow. Jace moved to the window and saw 3 dim headlamps drifting between firs, like eyes set too low to belong to anything natural. He opened the door a hand's width. Wet pine cut the air. The headlamps winked out. Silence returned, heavy and watchful. Kane rose and placed himself between Jace and the yard, not growling, not barking, only drawing a line with his body that said enough. A hiss of chains and a whisper of tires announced the approach without engines. Dirt bikes coasted into the clearing, lights taped so beams became slits. Cody led with the swagger of a boy who mistook props for authority. Tate followed, visor up and grin wide. Miles drifted behind them with his phone raised, hunting the angle that would make trespass look like a prank. Rain ran off their jackets in bright beads that did not belong to this place. They stopped below the porch. Cody swung a Louisville Slugger at the night air, feinting, as if warming up for a game that had rules. Evening, he called. Vance says property lines move when men with vision arrive. Jace kept still. The cabin stood behind him like a heartbeat. Kane set his feet, eyes on hands, tail level, weight forward. We'll be quick, Cody added, tapping the bat against a post. You sign. We celebrate progress. You stall. We make a scene. Either way, the market thanks us. Miles tilted the phone toward the porch. Smile, soldier, he said. Jace scanned for metal brighter than rain, saw no guns, saw arrogance in a stick. He measured the distance, and route to the truck, route to the med kit, and route to the radio. He did not raise his hands, because stillness is a command when done without apology. Tate stepped onto the first stair and rocked back on his heels like a showman waiting for applause. The bat floated to his shoulder. If the dog barks, we call the sheriff and say he charged. If the dog stays quiet, we call the sheriff and say you threatened us. Either way, paperwork bends our way. Kane's chest expanded, then held. He took half a step forward. The sound that left him was not volume. It was a boundary. Cody laughed and followed Tate up one more riser. Relax, he said. Everyone in this valley has a price. He cut the bat through a short arc aimed not at Jace, but at the dog's skull. Kane shifted, fast for a body that had already given too much, but the swing landed before the adjustment finished. The crack traveled through the porch boards and into Jace's bones. Kane's legs folded, claws skittered, blood spilled, a dark ribbon that vanished into rainwater and wood. Jace dropped to his knees, hands already at the dog's head, thumbs searching for breath. Kane's eyes tried to focus, lost the thread, tried again. Jace lifted him in one clean movement, one arm under the chest, one under the haunches, as if weight had never meant work. He carried the dog into the truck's lee where the wind lost some teeth. Cody whooped, drunk on theater. Tate froze, bat raised for another strike. Suddenly seeing the dead black in Jace's stare, Miles brought the phone closer, breath loud in his recording. Don't you quit on me, Kane. Not after Ramadi. Jace's mouth barely moved. The dog's chest pushed once against his forearm like a promise, fighting to stay real. He slid Kane onto the passenger floor, tucked a rolled blanket under the neck, pressed gauze along the matted fur, and tied a bandage with a knot he could have made blind. The med kit lay open on the seat, its contents neat, despite the tremor in his hands. Rain drummed. The generator ticked. The bat creaked as Tate adjusted his grip. Enough, Jace said, voice quiet and smooth. Leave. Cody twirled the bat. I like that tone, he said. Old soldier. Big dog, sad porch. We'll throw in a claim about a bite, add a bruise and watch the county not. Miles widened the frame to capture Jace. The dog, the bat, the storm. Look at the camera, he said. Turn around, Jace said. This is your last clean choice. Cody spat rain and smirked. Choice ended. When Phase 3 began, he flicked the bat at the truck mirror, meaning to shatter it for punctuation. Jace caught the strike on his forearm and shoved, not a punch, just a redirect that sent Cody stumbling off the step. Tate barked a laugh to hide surprise. Miles cursed because the frame had slipped. Jace settled the dog across the seat with the head in his lap, fingers at the neck, feeling the airway and pulse. He held pressure on the wound with steady hands. The dog shivered, then stilled. Jace kept speaking in low rhythms meant for injuries and deserts. "Stay with me," he said. Cody regained balance, and the pretense of control. He circled, reading angles. Tate hovered on the stairs. Miles edged left, hunting a vantage. "Tell your mutt he met capital," Cody said. "Progress hurts thin skin." Jace didn't look up. He watched the vein near Kane's eye for movement, counted to 4, waited for the next faint lift, then counted again. The storm washed sound into a single roar, except for the nearby scrape of a sole and the shiver of chain on sprocket. Tate raised the bat a second time, elbow high, eyes bright with the idea of finishing something. The dog made a low sound from deep inside pain. Tate's wrist wavered. He lowered the wood an inch. Miles broke the silence. "Get the mirror, and we'll bounce. We have enough." Cody needed a final image, a clip to sell. He charged the truck again. Jace did not set the dog down. He shifted his shoulder, let the bat slide along the jacket, stepped into Cody's space, and turned momentum into empty air. Cody fell into the gravel for the second time with less swagger and more shock. "You're boring me," Jace said. "Go home." The trio retreated a pace, found safety in distance, and rewrote the scene for themselves. Cody muttered about liability. Tate muttered about witnesses. Miles muttered about edit points. They backed toward the bikes, brought engines to life, and threaded out through cedar, into gray. Silence returned without comfort. Water ran off the roof in ropes. The creek swelled, and carried branches downstream. Jace pressed fresh gauze under the bandage to catch more blood, then braced Kane's head so the neck stayed straight. He steadied breathing with quiet counts. The dog's eyelid fluttered. The tail twitched a fraction, a memory of duty. He lifted the phone, thumbed a contact, and held it to his ear. Ghost answered. "Say it," Ghost said. "They hit him," Jace replied. The line tightened. "Pick up the locker key," Ghost said. "I'm inbound." Jace ended the call, and looked at the ridge through the rain. The world beyond the porch held the same contours, but meaning had shifted. Survey stakes meant less than breath moving under a palm. He slid his arms under the dog again, stood with the same calm he carried into rooms where doors had blown inward, and stepped toward the truck seat. Jace's hands shook as he wrapped Kane's head. This dog saved him from an IE. Now he was dying in Montana mud. If this breaks your heart, share it. Kane deserves to be heard. Rain burned down the 2-lane like quicksilver, as Jace pushed through the switchbacks toward Haven's Hollow, wipers ticking a rhythm that could not keep up. Kane lay braced on the passenger floor, head wrapped, breath thin, pupils uneven under heavy lids. Every few seconds, Jace set his palm against the dog's ribs, counting rise and fall as if each breath were a rung on a ladder out of dark water. Fallen limbs slapped the chassis. Flooded culverts forced detours through ruts that remembered other winters. A billboard for Drayton Holdings leaned beside the creek, its luxury render smeared by rain until the smiling couple looked like ghosts. He didn't slow. The clinic appeared at the tray line as a low bunker of cinder and steel, with security lamps set under the eaves and a plain stenciled sign, Valefield Clinic. He braked beneath the overhang, killed the engine, gathered Kane with the practiced care of a man who had carried wounded lives before, and shouldered through the door as it swung open on its own. Nora Vale stood inside the wash of hard white light, sleeves shoved high, hair tied back, gaze as direct as a tourniquet. Ex-army lived in her posture, in the economy of each gesture, in the way she made space without stepping aside. "Inside, now," she said, and the command felt like shelter. The room smelled of chlorhexidine, coffee gone cold, and generator oil, stainless tables, steel racks, a warming pad, an oxygen cart, IV stands, a battered clock that ticked loud enough to drown nerves if you let it. She moved to meet them, gloving as she walked. "Wait, 110, Jace answered, laying Kane on the pad with the smooth lift of a handler who knew what to protect. "He tracked an IED lane for me, near Ramadi." She nodded once, absorbing context, not story. Pulse, thready, dropping between breath. On the table, she said, though he already had. She clipped a pulse ox, set the bell of a stethoscope to Kane's chest, and counted with her eyes on the second hand. 64, irregular, respiration 7, skull trauma, right parietal, pupils anisocoric. She drew up mannitol, checked the dose, pushed slow, then signaled for an IV set. Jace hadn't noticed she'd primed. Set me 20 minutes on that clock. He tapped the timer and stepped back to give her a clean lane. Fluids dripped, oxygen whispered. The storm pressed hands against cinder walls and slid away. She palpated around the swollen knot, rewrapped it over his field bandage with narrow even turns, then slipped warm air beneath a blanket. Shear and concussion, she said. We reduce pressure, protect the airway, and keep him warm. If he seizes, we treat. Pain control when he stabilizes. No sugar, no pity, just the math of survival. She looked up. If he makes it, it's because he chooses to. The words landed like a challenge he trusted Kane would hear. Jace leaned close, not touching the wound, letting heat and steadiness do the talking. The night before returned in a flash, laughter with edges, a taped headlamp, the arc of a bat. He thumbed open his phone and moved to the far wall, leaving her room to work. 2 bars. Then 1. The call caught on the second ring. Heads up, he said. They hurt Kane. Silas, Ghost, Marrow answered, as if he'd never let go of the line. Then they declared war. The reply wasn't loud. It was final. Where? Heaven's Hollow. Vale's Clinic. I'm 2 hours out if the river behaves. Locker, keys on my chain. I'll open when he stabilizes. Copy. Expect surveillance. Watch plates. Don't let grief make you loud. Jace watched Nora test her reflexes with a penlight, checked the timer and returned to the table. Kane's breaths marked a stubborn cadence beneath the monitor's quiet metronome. Good boy, Nora said, soft enough to thread bone. The odds were a room full of knives. She refused to look at them while using every tool. She shifted the drip, rotated the clip, and set a second line in a 4-leg vein, with a motion graceful enough to be invisible. Tell me the strike, she said without pausing. Bat, Jace answered. Short swing, right side. Immediate collapse, no seizure. Vomited once in transit. Previous head insults. Blast waves. Hard landings. Deployment standard. Age, 9. Stubborn. He once refused to clear a lane until he found a wire no one else believed existed. The corner of her mouth almost bent. That trait helps heal. Lightning stitched the ridge. The generator coughed, then leveled out. Water raced through the gutters with a voice like boots on hollow boards. She checked pupils again. The difference narrowed 0.5 millimeter. Promising, she murmured, filing the word low so Hope wouldn't try to spring. A radio on a shelf popped and hissed. Sheriff traffic. The sound of a county keeping watch with too few deputies and too much ground. Riley's calm voice cut in to call a plate on County 18, then thinned to static. Jace breathed once, long and quiet. Another set of eyes mattered. Nora saw the shift without comment. If you need a buffer, call her, she said. She'll move before any agency with a logo. He nodded. Minutes stretched, then aligned, then stacked. Kane shuddered, then said. Jace rested a hand on the dog's shoulder and counted under his breath. Numbers steady enough to build a bridge. He told a memory into Kane's ear because language can anchor a drifting mind. Palm Grove. Dead noon, he said. You stopped, and I stopped. The plate sat under dust like a lie. You saved me, a name carved into a wall. You're not finished saving me. The monitor ticked on. The chest rose, fell, rose, fell. Each breath a rope tossed from the far bank. The timer clicked. Nora flushed the line and dimmed one of the can lights to ease the stimulant. Footsteps approached through standing water, measured and sure. The latch turned. Sheriff Riley Kane stepped through, steam lifting from her jacket, hat in her hand, attention sweeping the corners and coming to rest where it needed to be. You picked the right place, she said without Thea. Nobody better within 60 miles, Nora replied, hands busy. Riley moved to the side, close enough to be useful, far enough not to disrupt gravity. Black SUV with a rental tag loitered on 18. then went west, she said to Jace. No chase. I logged the plate. Information filed itself along a shelf in his skull marked later. Now meant breath, warmth, pressure, time. Nora listened through her stethoscope, shifted the bell, wrote numbers with quick printing that refused drama. Bandage is holding, she said. Bleed through minimal. Watch for post-traumatic apnea. We're keeping him inside the lines. The storm stepped back a pace. The room drew tighter, quieter, cleaner, as if the lights themselves had learned to hold steady. Jace let his jaw unclench. Rage walked its cage. Discipline kept the door shut. You're doing well, Nora said without looking at him. So is he. He always does, Jace answered. He always will, she said, because sometimes grammar can be medicine too. Kane's jaw worked, tongue shifting under the clip. The monitor chirped fast twice, then corrected. Nora paused until the rhythm found itself. Reflex, she said. Not a fall-off. Riley checked the window and latched it against a gust that wanted to pry, then returned to her station by the shelf bearing syringes in tidy rows. The generator thrummed. The drip clicked. The dog breathed. The man counted. The doctor timed. The sheriff watched. The world for a hard-won span did nothing worse than rain. Jace slid a palm under the blanket and felt heat where cold had tried to win. Kane's ear twitched against the wrap as if the body recognized its sentry post and would not cede it. We'll hold him here until the swelling trends, Nora said. Then films at the hospital. He may hate the cone. You'll hate my invoice. Both are survivable. It should have been a joke. It sounded like a plan. Riley's radio murmured again. Units checked doors, flagged a downed pine, called a tow for a sedan buried to the axles in ditch water. Normal life threaded the edges of their bunker, thin but unbroken. Jace tucked the blanket closer at the neck to keep warmth where it mattered. He spoke low and certain. Easy. Partner, you've got today. Take it. The tail moved once under the sheet. A small, stubborn vote that belonged only to them. Kane's chest rose, fell, one heartbeat at a time. Subscribe now. You need to see what happens when a SEAL's dog refuses to die. Ghost reached the clinic at first light, shoulders squared against a wind that smelled of wet pine and old iron, a pelican case in his hand, and the same unreadable calm he had worn on nights when exits were smoke. He nodded to Nora Vale, without wasting syllables, then found Jace beside the glass where Kane slept under a warm hum, head bandaged, breaths counting a thin rhythm that refused to quit. He's still fighting, Jace said. Ghost answered by setting the case on a rolling tray and opening 4 latches like he was removing safeties. Inside lay a matte laptop scarred with travel and 3 drive sticks nested in foam. I pulled threads you flagged last year, he said. Numbers on those billboards didn't match filings. Drayton is a mask, and the face behind it belongs to Blackthorn. The word carried sand and night and a burned-out convoy that had turned half a platoon into names. Ghost powered on, booted a hardened OS from a stick, and leaned close enough for the screen's blue to cut lines across his jaw. Shell companies in Delaware, a logistics outfit in Spokane, and a Montana land trust that bought rights up and down this valley. Names on those boards are clean, but the officers underneath them show up in a database of contractors tied to that ambush, outside Alkerna. Same unit we thought disbanded. Same commander running a consultancy with a new letterhead. He tapped a folder. Manifests, unrolled, pallet counts, container IDs. Routes nowhere near a port. They're moving controlled assemblies labeled as agricultural sensors. The serial blocks map to guidance auxiliaries that NATO locks down hard, targeting support modules for airborne packages and smart tube. Not the warheads, but the brains that make them precise. Discrete, compact, high value. He pulled a topo overlay into view, lines rendering the ridge and creek in green. Shipment enters from the north via feeder highway, switches to flatbeds registered to a ranch contractor, then disappears from official logs near your boundary. On your side, game trails make a clean corridor to an ATV cut that predates your deed. That trail hits a fire road, then a disused gravel spur to a private airstrip west of the lake. Photos stacked like cards. Tire tracks in duff under spruce. A white stencil on a crate lip. A drone shot of a tin-roofed shed with fresh chain marks on the ramp. They needed solitude. Bought it by surviving. They figured a quiet veteran wouldn't raise noise until paperwork finished paving the way. Jace watched Kane's flank rise and fall in the reflection and felt the old steady cold climb up through his shoes. "Show me who signs," he said. Ghost slid to a chart of directors, layered shell after shell until the same 3 surnames kept reappearing in different shadows. Drayton fronts, but the cash and muscle come from Blackthorn. 2 team leads from the old outfit, 5 operators rotating in, plus temps from a failed security bid out of Texas. Those boys on bikes were theater. Real work stays in the tree. He opened another image. An intermodal seal snapped, and was replaced with a clean duplicate. A clipboard clipped with carbon copies. A glove with the fingertips cut away, revealing a tattoo of a thorned ring. The mark pulled breath out of the room. "They never left," Jace said. "They just changed uniforms." Ghost nodded once. "They also learned paperwork better than we did." He keyed up county records for a water improvement district, whose map happened to cover every bend of the creek that formed Jace's backline. They stood up a district to legalize heavy vehicles on maintenance easements. That gives them a reason to run traffic through at hours people accept. Add survey stakes to bully you into a sale and a fake hazard to make you look unstable if you complain. He clicked on a log file harvested from a compromised handheld. 3 entries scrolled past: package cluster fox, ridge watch, and handler dog. Ghost's eyes hardened. They were watching you by name 2 weeks before tonight's assault didn't happen because a brat got brave. It followed a calendar. He pushed up a satellite frame stamped with a recent date. Heat blooms dotted the timberline like embers under ash. Motion sensors along the meadow cut. 2 at the creek bend. Something with a wide band sweep on the saddle north of your place. They've built a tunnel of quiet around their path. He dropped another image. A customs declaration stamped on a port 3 states away, signed by a proxy who had last paid property tax on a cabin no one had seen open in 8 years. Paper trails fit together like bones. "You said they were ads and billboards and lies," Ghost murmured. "You were right. The truth is math and mud." Jace rested a palm on the glass and watched the dog breathe. The old desert came back. A road at noon. A smell of hot copper. A name whispered before silence. "They're using the same trails we died on," he said, and the sentence felt like a map that had finally been labeled. Ghost did not offer comfort. He used the line like a bearing, which means we know their blind corners better than they do. He minimized the map and opened a recording cached from an encrypted channel. A familiar voice. The contractor who had once issued their convoy a change of route 5 minutes before the kill zone spoke about modules staged by the weekend, and aircraft windows before. Another voice referenced a sheriff with spine and a seal up the ridge, followed by a dry laugh and a promise to keep law tied up in compliance reviews, until frost hid ruts. Ghost paused the clip. "You have 2 clocks," he said. "One on Kane's recovery, one on their lip." He nodded toward the case. "You also have your oath to the living." "I'm not asking for rage. I'm asking for decisions." Nora stepped from the observation room and set a hand on the tray, eyes steady, expression medical and human at once. "Your partner is holding," she said to Jay. "Pressure looks better. He's not out of the woods, but he's moving in the right direction." Ghost closed the recording and returned to the topo. "The airstrip shows activity on Thursdays," he said. "Fuel delivery logs from a regional supplier lineup with manifests for that same day. They load at dusk to beat the wind. A storm looks to park over the lake tomorrow night. If they try to push into that window, they'll move fast and quietly." He pinched the map and traced a loop around the cabin. "Here's where survey flags give them courage. A feeder path crosses your fence, hits the old skid road, then snakes behind your creek blind. If we close the blinds and leave the skid road looking open, they'll choose the line that feels familiar. They've done it enough to believe routine is covered." Jace took that in, weighed blood against timing, then looked at Nora. "If we keep him warm and quiet, will the road trip to imaging wait until tomorrow night?" She measured the dog's breathing, then the man's face. "If he keeps trending, yes. Morning might be safe. Tonight he stays anchored, and so do you." Ghost watched the exchange with the same alert patience he used on split rooms. "We can shape without breaking rules," he said. "Call Riley. She gets federal ears when paperwork wants to listen. We give her the syndicate link and the module. She brings lawful weight. Meanwhile we put eyes on the ridge and record every plate, boot and crate." He slid over a compact camera, a thermal monocular, and 3 tiny mics sealed in plastic. Witness, not vigilant. But if they cross your line again, we make sure the record shows who crossed first. He offered Jace a thin drive. Everything here ties Drayton to Blackthorn. Names, shells, contracts, payments, routes, enough to make the right agents sit up. Jace closed his hand around the drive, the way he would close a hand on a promise. The room tightened to the essentials. A man, a dog, a past that had changed masks, a friend who refused to let shadows lie. Outside, the ridge held rain, the way a lung holds air before a shout. Inside, machines kept steady time, and a heartbeat matched it out of sheer will. Call the sheriff, Jace. Ghost dialed and spoke 6 facts in a tone built for reports that later stand up in court. Riley answered like someone who had slept with her boots near the door. Bring what you have, she said. I'll bring a recorder and a copy of the statute that keeps cowboys from pretending they're customs. Ghost ended the call and returned to the map one more time. They counted on silence, he said. They forgot who you are. Jace looked at Kane and nodded once. An oath renewed without speech. Truth sat on the tray and files and photographs, heavy enough to tilt the day. Plans could wait for the next breath, then the next. For now the ridge had a name, the enemy had a face, and the trails had finally spoken. Dusk folded over Blackthorn Ridge, and the cabin became a machine with one purpose. Jace measured the clearing with a carpenter's tape and ran orange mason line at shin height, from the porch post to the stump to the boulder, and the boulder to the split rail that faced the skid road. Each line fed a flash can he had packed to blind and stun without throwing metal. Sandbags climbed waist-high along the porch corners and stacked a second tier beneath the kitchen window. He poured pea gravel into a thin bed under that sill so footsteps would sing on contact. He taped the inside panes with blackout plastic, left 2 hand-cut slits hinged with leather, and marked safe lanes through the rooms with strips of cloth that glowed under red light. By the door he set a coil of paracord, a first aid kit, and a canvas sack with beanbag shells lined like patient teeth. Ghost arrived at last light, shoulders wet, pelican case swinging from his hand. He popped 4 latches and laid out tools like evidence already won. Thermal monocular, compact camera, parabolic mic, 2 handhelds, spare antennas, batteries, marker pens, zip ties, and a lined notebook, because courts still like ink. He strung a passive loop in the rafters, tuned the scanner across county units and highway crews, and clipped pin mics to the porch frame and shed corner where the skid road pinched into the yard. We keep eyes out and facts in, he said. Riley reads tonight, feds read tomorrow. Kane stirred from the blanket by the stove, stood with care, and dragged himself to the threshold with stubborn grace. The new bandage held. His breath came shallow but steady. He set his chin on the sill and looked at the treadline like a sentry returning to post after a bad night. Jace eased the blanket around his chest and rubbed the rough until his tight shoulders softened. Guard, he said. The shepherd accepted the word and stilled, ears forward, eyes calm, tail quiet. They ate standing jerky rye crackers and 2 cups of water. Nora called with numbers trending up in a short order to keep him warm. Ghost checked the thermal. The meadow was inked with islands of chalk, where rocks held the day's heat. The skid road showed as a faint stripe angling toward their fence. They killed the house lights and worked by red lenses. Jace walked the web, one last time, pressed knots with his thumb, and tucked flash cans behind bark and tassel fern. He dusted the top step with powdered chalk that would cling to wet tread. He placed a small camera low behind the split rail to catch knees and thighs, because faces dodge, but gates confess. Rain returned in a fine hiss. They took positions as night fell. Jace knelt behind the right corner, sandbags with the pump at low ready, breech open, beanbag shell visible. Ghost crouched at the kitchen corner, thermal to eye, mic cable looped over one shoulder. Kane watched without a sound. Then a twig cracked where caution thought it was perfect. Ghost raised 2 fingers, listening to the nothing that tells itself. Heat smudges bloomed across the monocular in a shallow arc. 1 low, 1 tall, 2 behind them, 2 offset to cover. He breathed a count and a verdict. 6 signatures, suppressed. NVGs. Jace slowed his breathing. 6 meant doctrine, a forward pair to feel for lines. a middle pair to carry, a tail pair to keep the arc honest. Suppressors and night optics meant they believed they owned the dark and the consequences. Let belief carry them. The lead pair split at the alder and slid toward the yard. A knee brushed mason line tight to damp grass. Light detonated white and immediate, smacking the night flat. The flash stole shape and rhythm, turned fists into spears, and brought 3 long beats of confusion. Another foot found the gravel bed under the window. Crunches walked into the mic and onto the recorder in a clear, impartial chain. Someone hissed a command. A shoulder hit the porch rail a fraction too hard. Jace waited. He did not fire. He let angles narrow and mistakes declare themselves. "Identify yourselves," Ghost called, voice level and official. "County Sheriff is en route. Step away from the residence. Do it now." A shape lunged to the post to balance. Jace raised the pump, pressed once, and the beanbag thumped into the forearm like a judge's gavel without a set. The man cried out, dropped a tool, and reeled into a partner who had trained for everything except that. Another fired blind from the yard. The muffled string rattled pine, hit nothing, and died. The corridor formed, just as planned. Rail to bags, bags to wall, wall to doorway, every line tightening movement into a file. Chalk popped at the shed corner and turned the air milk white. Riley's cruiser crested the drive and angled its lens at the porch and the road. Her voice rode the speaker, steady as habit. "County Sheriff, hands where I can see them. Back away from that house. Drop gear. Do not turn your optics toward me." The front pair froze. One raised a hand high and slow, as if bargaining with a script that had changed mid-scene. The rear element slid toward timber with pride, moving faster than feet. Ghost filmed where fog allowed and printed times in the notebook with deliberate strokes. Jace held his lane and watched shoulders change from ready to resign. The nearest intruder set his device on the gravel with 2 fingers and gave a name that did not match any shell. Ghost had mapped. The recorder swallowed every syllable. Kane never blinked. He stayed at the threshold, chest lifted, presence anchored, bandage pale under the red glove. Jace touched the rough once in thanks, and returned to the window slit. Riley advanced, cuffed 2, staged 1 on his knees, and stopped short of the trip mesh. She met Jace's eyes for a fraction, and tipped her head. Ghost walked the route with the camera while the chalk still clung to the tread. He shot tripped line ends, porch post, tool P gravel scuff, skid road entry, and the place where Flash had baked needles into brittle curls. He filmed inside to show restraint, slits, angles, breech open, beanbag visible. The scanner coughed once, then joined a calm rotation of codes as backup arrived. Mics caught breath where shouts had been. The cabin stayed dark and sure. The kill box had taut without taking blood. Kane lowered to his elbows and watched outlines turn into uniform. His tail tapped the sill once, tired and proud. Jace exhaled, set the pump safe, and leaned his shoulder against the jamb. "Post secure," he said. Ghost closed the notebook and tucked it inside his jacket like a deep. On the ridge, the fog thinned and carried the smell of wet phir and cold stone, and something that felt close to promise. They had held the line with light, tape, gravel, and patience. The record would carry the rest in daylight, where names and rotes cannot pretend to be shadowed. Rain hammered Blackthorn Ridge, until the clearing shone like steel. The cabin sat dark behind a wall of sandbags, pea gravel waiting to tattle beneath the kitchen sill. Jace held the porch corner with the pump, at low ready, beanbags first, because restraint is a choice. Ghost crouched inside by a narrow slit, thermal to his eye, recorder strapped to his sleeve. Kane lay at the threshold on a folded blanket, bandage firm, eyes steady, breath thin but stubborn, the doorframe his post and promise. They came just after midnight, 6 figures in staggered pairs, slipping out of the timber, boots soft, optics bright with borrowed night. Mason, line tripped a strobe at the alder and crushed the yard into white. Dark slammed back. The lidman chopped a signal and advanced anyway. Suppressed shots thudded into siding. Splinters whispered past the porch rail. Jace kept his breath even. "Identify yourselves," he called, voice clear for the mic and the law. A round smacked the post. He answered with one beanbag to the chest of the closest silhouette and dropped him to a knee, without a hole to argue about later. Ghost whispered, 6 signatures. Suppressed. NVGs. Heat smudges bloomed at the shed path. The second pair clipped chalked risers, and stumbled. Another strobe detonated, and bought 2 clean beats. The third pair slid left toward the kitchen. Gravel sang under careful feet. Down by the second fence line, Riley's cruiser idled, spotlight feathering the trees without blinding the house. The recorder ate everything. Steps, commands, rain blunt and impartial. An intruder rushed up the steps with a strap of plastic bags clinking like tools. Kane rose and struck in a single line of motion, teeth closing on the wrist above the glove. The strap fell. The man shouted and reeled back. A muffled burst snapped toward the doorway. Jace leaned and let the rail take it. Back, he ordered. Kane released and reversed to the threshold, eyes locked. Weight forward, tail still. Blood met rain and thinned into a narrow thread. The porch washed away. On the ridge, a single rifle shot cracked, flat and clean. Grady Holt had settled with old glass and his cane across his knees. His bullet severed a flashlight from the hand that held it, and sent both spinning into the brush. The line faltered. Ghost filmed the stumble, and wrote the time and bearing with tidy strokes built for courtrooms. Jace slid to the other slit, and waited for the forced mistake. It came with a rush. A figure vaulted the rail to cut the corner, and met a beanbag center mass. Air left lungs, fight left legs. He folded, and went quiet with his hands where Riley would want them. Rain intensified and made the yard hum. Suppressed strings stitched the kitchen wall, guesses masquerading as angles. Jace ran the hall, and cleared room by room. Mudroom empty but for the unopened steel locker. Bedroom neat, with photographs, face down. Bathroom ticking. He returned to the front, as Ghost breathed a count. 2 left, 2 center. 1 prone by the stump covering. Riley's voice turned distance into instruction. On your stomachs. Hands out. Do not reach, for optics. Comply now. 1 obeyed. The prone shooter tugged a blind line toward the porch. Bark hopped on the sill, and died. Jace put a beanbag into the stump's edge, and sent the shooter's elbow into gravel, where it could learn something. Kane planted at the door again, bandage bright, body aligned with the frame. Pain had weight. Duty had more. Jace touched his shoulder once, and kept the lamp. Ghost tracked a glove creeping along the kitchen sill. Jace ghosted left, waited for a boot toe to show under the skirt board, and shoved the door wide with his shoulder. The intruder spilled into the room, and found himself facing a muzzle held low, and a badge glinting in rainlight outside. 2 invitations. To stop choosing badly. The last pair tried to time a push with a gust. A strobe cut them out of the weather and pinned them like paper shape. Jace planted 2 controlled beanbags, and took them off their feet, into custody. Backup rolled in behind Riley. Prone, hands flat. You're detained, she said, steady as a rulebook. Gunfire thinned to nothing. Night remembered it was rain. The creak voice rose as rifles fell silent. A quiet older than men and plans. A new engine note rose on the road. Smooth and late, a black SUV eased into the lane and stopped, as though the ground belonged to it. The rear door opened before the chassis settled. Vance Drayton stepped into the spotlight with a smile made for ribbon cuttings, and unfit for a wet yard full of handcuffs. An umbrella inverted in the wind. 2 handlers froze at the sight of badges that refused to play extra. Vance surveyed the scene as if a meeting had started, without him, and he still expected applause. He saw cuffs on his hires, a sheriff with no patience for theater, a camera that loved facts, strobe housings threaded among rails, sandbags stacked with purpose, pea gravel still glittering where feet had been honest, and a dog at the sill, looking straight through him. Then he saw Jace step out alive and steady, balanced and finished with being told what the story would be. The smile failed. Mr. Ryder, Vance began, softer now. Presentation voice trimmed for damage control. Unfortunate escalation. My team misread the perimeter. Your team brought weapons to a porch in a storm, Jace said. Restraint kept them on their feet. Riley moved between them as if statute had grown legs. Mr. Drayton, this is a secured scene. Return to your vehicle. Keep your hands visible. Do not address the resident. She angled a shoulder. Dispatch multiple detained. Notify the federal contact. Advise that items from the earlier packet are in active use. The radio answered with clipped acknowledgement. Ghost's lens stayed on Vance, underlining details a court would need when morning traded rain for paper. Grady never shifted on the ridge. The scope glass caught a hint of lightning and went dark again. Kane set his chin on the sill, eyes on Vance, tail tapping once like a mark on a ledge. Rain eased to a patient hiss. The yard smelled of wet fur and cold stone, and something cleaner than fear. Vance lifted both hands, and tried a new script. "Sheriff, we can resolve this privately. There are efficiencies." "Stop," Riley said. "Hands higher. Turn. Walk back to the We will speak on record." Her tone made the spotlight redundant. He obeyed by inches, learning in public. Jace breathed out. The weight in his ribs moved from rage to resolve. He locked the pump open, and laid it on the table with the breech visible. Then he knelt by Kane and spoke for the dog alone. "Good work." The shepherd's eyes softened. Duty had been seen and answered. The door held by the same will that once held a lane far from home. Backup officers moved in lines that fit the space, gloved and careful, logging each item that arrived to cause harm and surrendered to sequence instead. Ghost narrated time and placement without heat. Riley wrote names and plates in neat strokes that looked like accountability. Vance stood by his open door and stared as if the right sentence could rewind a night. No sentence came. The ridge held. The creek kept speaking its language of gravity and return. The strobes cooled. Gunfire became a record rather than a threat. Blood thinned into gravel and vanished without spectacle. Jace looked over the yard and saw proof instead of chaos. Men prone with wrists secured, tools tagged, lines photographed, paths measured, law present. He looked at the ridge and saw a neighbor who offered one shot at history and then let restraint do its slower work. He looked at Ghost and saw the promise of evidence that would not bend. He looked at Kane and saw the reason he had answered the door at all. Vance finally spoke again, almost to himself. "I expected compliance. You found consequence," Jace said. Riley closed his door and gestured for him to get into the driver's seat. "Keys on the roof," she said. "Step." He obeyed because the night had taken away his alternate verbs. Engines idled. Radios murmured. The storm exhaled and drifted north. Jace stood in the doorway and let the cabin be a home again. The sandbags still held their line, but the rooms behind him were more than angles and lanes. They were decisions he could live with when dawn arrived. Ghost packed the recorder and labeled the card. Riley nodded once. A small salute between people who prefer clear morning. Kane blinked slowly, and kept the threshold. The night settled into a story with names on it, and none of those names were his dead. Rain tapered to mist. The ridge kept watch. The cabin breathed. The war some men wanted never started here. It ended.
Rain thinned to a silver veil over Blackthorn Ridge, leaving the clearing slick and quiet, while the cabin held steady behind sandbags. Deputies logged optics, radios, cases and tools. Tarps covered the detained. Sheriff Riley Kane stood at the porch with hat tucked, posture saying chaos was finished and documented. Vance Drayton lingered by his idling SUV with a smile that belonged to billboards, not mud. He mentioned permits and misunderstandings until his voice stalled against Ghost's wrist-mounted recorder and the sealed evidence bag swinging from a deputy's belt. Jace stepped from the threshold calm and dry-eyed, the deliberate stillness of someone who picked proof over rage. Kane watched from the doorway, bandage neat, chest rising in a stubborn rhythm, eyes following every hand that moved. Riley nodded. "Scene is stable. Hold until federal units arrive." Ghost filmed angles, listed timestamps, sketched distances and passed Jace a pair of cuffs from the locker. "Kitchen." He said, "Microphones hear everything in there." Jace opened Vance's door, guided him inside, then walked him through the rain toward the wood stove. The enamel was chipped from winters that had taught their own sermon. Jace threaded one bracelet through a side rail, seated Vance on a chair, drew his right wrist to the steel, and closed the shackle until it kissed bone without biting. The second looped the first so the arm could rest but not wander. Riley watched, then spoke into her mic. Primary subject temporarily restrained to a fixed point for officer safety and evidence preservation. No injury. Vance tried Hotar. My counsel will love this image. Mine too, Riley said. Ghost panned the cuff. Rail and chair legs braced against sandbags. Then lowered the lens. Congratulations, you're visible, he told Vance. Try truth. Kane shifted, tail tapping once against the jam. Jace set a bowl of water at his paws. The shepherd drank and returned to quiet watch. Wind moved through the firs. Radios crackled air inbound from the east. The sound arrived first, a heavy thrum that flattened puddles and rattled stove lids. A DOJ Blackhawk flared above the tray line, lights dark. A second bird orbiting the road and then dropped in hard. A rope ladder fell. Rotor wash through needles like hail. Riley's voice cut clean. Clear the pad. DOJ operators slid down in pairs, visors reflective. Insignia muted, purpose obvious. They flowed into a perimeter, checked tarps, counted wrists, and moved for the porch. A team leader stopped at the step. Sheriff Kane, rear your ride to federal jurisdiction. Welcome, Riley answered. Evidence labeled, video and audio from 2 sources. No gunshot wounds, beanbag bruises, and 1 bite earned on approach. The leader nodded, read the yard in a breath, then tilted his chin toward the kitchen. Primary, cuffed to a stove. Riley said. House is calm. He stepped inside, saw Vance and didn't bother hiding recognition. Mr. Drayton, we've been waiting to talk. Vance worked at a smile. I came to de-escalate. You came late, the leader said. He glanced at Jay. Sir, thank you for your restraint under threat. Ghost handed over a drive. Shell, structures, shipment logs, airstrip schedules, contractor rosters, plus a link from Drayton Holdings to the Blackthorn Syndicate. Copy. The leader pocketed it and turned to Riley. Your line for the report. Riley met his gaze. This wasn't a shootout, this was retribution. The words sat in the kitchen like honest weather. He keyed his mic. Command confirmed statement by county sheriff. Scene stable, parties detained. Evidence secured, primary restrained, unhurt. He checked circulation at Vance's wrist. Then faced him. You'll ride out calm. Outside, deputies loaded crates into Pelican cases. Operators clipped tamper seals and wrote neat block label. Ghost filmed each tag, then filmed the act of filming because redundancy keeps defense attorneys bored. A second helicopter slid higher to watch the ridge road. Patrol headlights glittered far below and stopped at the cattle guard where a unit waited. Inside, Kane tracked footsteps. A federal knelt by the threshold, extended a gloved hand slowly, let the dog sniff, then rested a palm near the bandage without pressure. The tail thumped once. A verdict small and absolute. Nora Vale checked in by speaker from the clinic. Jace relayed vital. She approved a short ride for imaging later if the weather held and insisted on warmth, low noise and patience until then. The leader unclipped Jace's cuff, replaced it with federal steel, and positioned Vance between 2 operators. The developer tried a last-minute paragraph about investment and civic benefit. No one answered because consequence does better work without debate. Riley addressed the room. Mr. Ryder, statement at first light. Mr. Marrow, same. Files are mirrored at the county and federal level. We'll process detainees, clear the lane and close this place clean. Jace eased the blanket. Let Kane rest his head on a folded jacket that smelled like pine and coffee, then stood and faced Vance with the kind of distance that protects dignity from fury. He kept it. The procession moved. The porch steps took boots that knew how to leave. Rotor wash bent the alder and spun leaves into tiny galaxies over puddles. Detainees walked first, wrists secured, chins level, boots careful. Vance followed under quiet hands that did not hate him, only refused illusion. He glanced back once at the stove, at the dog, at the man who had chosen restraint before rage. He understood the order of power had changed. The leader paused at the door and gave Kane a nod meant for the truth alone. Good. The helicopter lifted, slid above the trees and droned toward the valley. Wind pressed shingles, rattled chains and sent the kettle on the back burner into a soft whistle. Spotlight washed the clearing, then faded. Darkness returned with steadier breath. Riley exhaled, holstered her pen and stood with one hand on the jam. Ghost closed the last case and stacked it for the morning. Deputies sealed the final bag and signed the ledger. Radios settled into ordinary calls, a downed tree by the lake road, a stranded pickup near the feed store. Life edged back. Jace poured 2 cups and set one on the floor for the scent. Warmth climbed into his palms and chased a tremor he hadn't admitted. Kane sighed and watched the room with the gravity all sentries learn. Hold, wait, witness. Riley looked across the kitchen. Door's yours again. It always was, Jace said. Ghost slid the bolt gently. Rain softened into mist that carried fur and stone. The stove ticked as metal cooled. Evidence slept in numbered bags. The ridge held its silence like a pact. Jace sat on the floor beside Kane, shoulder to shoulder. He didn't need to. The night had delivered justice without speeches, only work. The dog blinked once, content. The tail tapped the blanket for the record. The home, the bond. Tires crunched, then faded. An owl called at the creek bend. Heat settled, breath slowed, and the cabin remembered being a house instead of a fortress. Dawn, somewhere behind the weather, gathered itself. The worst men had been lifted out. The good ones stayed long enough to On the table waited a small drive beaded with rain, the kind of weight that redraws maps. We're still here, he said. The law agreed. Night finally agreed. 1 year after the night the ridge went white with strobes, Blackthorn breathed easy again. Snow had burned off. Spring washed the gullies clean. Summer baked the rocks sweet. And now autumn moved with a gentler hand. The cabin stood behind a rebuilt fence and a porch that no longer needed sandbags. Pea gravel still lay under the kitchen sill. Not as a tripline, just a reminder that vigilance can live without fury. The rehab yard sat on a shallow terrace where the first light pooled. Nora Vale had laid rails, shade cloth, and rubber matting so joints could relearn their purpose. At first she came every other morning, then weekly, then phoned for numbers and news. Today the yard belonged to Kane. He walked the rails in smooth concentration, weight even, head level, gaze bright, a modest limp telling the truth without asking for pity. He paused at each cone, took the ramp at a careful pace, and rested when wisdom said stop. Beyond the terrace, a new cedar sign faced the clearing that once looked like a chessboard. Its letters were carved deep for weather and years. Here a dog held the line. People came by now and then, locals after church. Hikers from the lake who had heard the story in pieces. Deputies who parked in the shade for 10 silent minutes on their meal break. They did not speak. They read. They nodded. They left a small strip of quiet behind them as a bow. Riley had insisted the sign be simple because simple endures. The airstrip that once swallowed pallets and secrets now grew thistles and sage. Federal tags changed hands. Indictments grew legs. The paper turned into a consequence. The county kept the gate locked and the gravel swept. When rotors crossed the ridge, they were training flights or rescue birds, and people looked up with trust. Miller's General kept a jar by the register for Nora's working dog fund. The sticker showed a paw and a cross and a promise to pay forward what one dog had paid. On the porch, Jace set a low stool where the boards were warm and a bowl where Shadow would catch it by noon. He clipped the rehab leash, loosened it an inch at a time, and let the pace be set by breath, not pride. Easy, he said, a word with new edge. Kane watched the meadow as if reading a clean page. Elk drifted along the pine line. A pickup crossed the cattle guard, its radio playing a song the valley knew by heart. The world finally matched its season. Evenings belonged to teach. Twice a week, Jace drove to the school gym to help handlers and dogs learn balance, posture, calm and command. He hauled cones, a folding ramp, and a bucket of tennis balls marked with letters for memory drills. Kane worked at the edge, modeling release and patience, then napped under a bench until a child needed to learn how to greet a dog with respect. Nora stopped in and told them that good medicine is mostly timing. Riley visited and told them that good law is mostly documentation and restraint. Ghost showed them how to keep notes a judge would trust. When the anniversary arrived, the sky went the color of hammered tin and the wind came clean from the west. Before dawn, Jace and Ghost hiked to the rock where Grady Holt had settled his old rifle and sent one shot into history. They set a small flag there and left a coil of new paracord because gratitude ought to be useful. Grady joined them at mid-morning. Kane carved from elk antler, breath shorter, eyes still sharp. He looked over the meadow and simply said, "Good lines." Nothing needed add. By afternoon the creek lifted a skin of mist and brushed the meadow with pale motion. Jace grilled venison, boiled rice and let Kane take his portion with formal gravity. The scar on the dog's skull had faded to a pale streak. Strength had come back in quiet layers. Grace rode the top. After the dishes, he checked the gate and walked the fence that he and half the valley had rebuilt. Each post had a story from a neighbor who showed up because some fights do not need invitations. At dusk he sat on the step and told Kane what the year had taught. He spoke about Ramadi and an old map that lied, about chalk under a kitchen window, about the sentence Riley had said that fit the night, about Nora's unshakable hands, about Ghost's math that made the truth visible, about Mabel's nod at the register, about Grady's scope on the ridge, about the jar, about the sign. The dog listened with the tail thumping once at the right places. A vote counted and recorded. Inside, a small radio near the stove carried the local station. The program rolled through the weather, a school fundraiser and songs with dust on them. Halfway through the hour the host paused. The room shifted. Tonight, the voice said low and steady, we honor Jace Ryder and Kane, not for the war they survived, but for the war they ended. The sentence felt heavier than the speaker. It settled like a blanket. It meant the valley had decided how to tell the story. Morning returned like a promise that actually keeps. They walked the rehab yard in a slow, deliberate loop and paused by the gate to watch the mist lift from the grass. A hawk circled over all. The cedar sign caught a slant of light, and the letters glowed as if the wood itself remembered. Kane looked up and held Jace's eyes with work and joy braided together. Pride lived there, the quiet kind that keeps watch instead of demanding applause. Jace unclipped the leash and let him finish the circuit on his own. In town, a girl read a report about service animals and asked whether Kane could visit her class. Jace said yes. The dog endured a ring of careful hands with saintly patience. Afterward, a boy who stuttered found his voice by reading from a photograph of the sign. He said slowly and clearly, "Here." A dog held the line. The room made a sound like wind through wheat and then went still. Back home, Jace stacked cords, checked the stove and opened the window so the pine could walk into the kitchen. He brewed coffee, stirred honey into the dog's water, and stood with one hand on the jam. The valley felt like a vow renewed. The law had done its part. The land had healed what it could, and the rest belonged to memory and use. Kane lay on the threshold with his chin on the wood as if the doorframe were a medal you could wear without ceremony. If you have ever looked at a dog and found your courage reflected back, share their story tonight. If you believe loyalty still matters, subscribe and stay with us. We will keep telling the hard, clean truths. The ones that end wars in small places, one choice at a time.